Why boss manipulated me into donating my kidney to save his daughter's life by promising me a promotion, but he lied. I didn't save an innocent life. I gave a monster a second chance. Now that I know the truth, I'm taking him, and everything he tried to protect, down, piece by piece. At 18, I suddenly became the sole guardian of a child who wasn't biologically mine. My girlfriend, Jane, and I had just finished high school when her elder sister, Lisa, tearfully approached us about her struggles with conception. She had spent 3 years trying to have a baby and was desperate. She pleaded with us to consider surrogacy, given our youth and good health. I was hesitant, but eventually agreed, as Jane seemed comfortable with the idea, and my affection for her made me want to support her family. Everything proceeded smoothly initially, until Jane was 8 months pregnant with Lisa's child. That's when Lisa appeared at our apartment, announcing a promotion that necessitated a move to Europe. She stated she couldn't manage a baby with this career opportunity and wished for us to keep the child, as we had already grown fond of him. Jane completely lost her composure, shouting at Lisa that this was not the arrangement and that she was unprepared for motherhood at 18. But Lisa was indifferent. She simply departed the country. Jane gave birth a month later, and we brought the baby home. My parents were absent from my life, and Jane's parents claimed they were too exhausted to assist, leaving all the responsibility to us. It was, to put it mildly, an absolute nightmare. We had abandoned travel aspirations and career prospects, sacrificing everything to raise this little boy, or so I believed. It quickly became evident that Jane was unable to cope with the baby. She frequently yelled at him, and, over time, began making remarks about vanishing, much like her sister. These remarks, it turned out, foreshadowed reality. One morning, I awoke to feed young Thomas and discovered a note on the kitchen counter. Jane had written that she needed to find herself and could no longer continue. She was gone. I attempted to contact her, but she had already disconnected her phone number. For the subsequent 10 years, I dedicated everything to Thomas. I did not pursue higher education. I started working 2 jobs and devoted every spare moment to being the best father I could be. My own father was never present, and I was determined not to repeat his errors. It wasn't much, but Thomas cherished it. Fast forward 10 years, Thomas referred to me as Dad, without a second thought. He was aware of his background, but it held no significance for him. As far as he was concerned, I was his father. That's when Lisa appeared at Thomas's school during pickup, the first time in a decade. She was dressed in designer attire and driving a Mercedes. Apparently, she had married a tech executive and decided she now wanted to assume the role of mother, with the difficult part seemingly behind her. I recall Thomas hiding behind my leg when she attempted to approach him. He whispered, "Dad, who is that woman?" And my heart ached. Lisa's face flushed, and she began causing a commotion right there in the parking lot. "I'm your mother," she repeatedly insisted, while Thomas pressed his face into my jeans. Other parents began to stare. I picked Thomas up and carried him to our car while Lisa pursued us, screaming about her rights. That night, she inundated my phone with messages demanding to see her son. I reminded her of the legal documents she had signed relinquishing her parental rights. She claimed her new husband's lawyer would nullify those papers. The following week, she began appearing everywhere, at the grocery store, at the park, during baseball practice. She would take photographs from a distance and upload them to Facebook with captions like, "Watching my baby boy from afar, because his kidnapper won't let me near him." Then she escalated. She started telling other parents at school that something was amiss with a young single man being so fixated on raising someone else's child. She would corner mothers at pickup and murmur about how it was unnatural for a man to wish to raise a boy independently. One day, I was assisting Thomas with his homework at the kitchen table when there was a knock at the door. 2 Child Protective Services workers stood there with stern expressions. They stated they had received a report concerning inappropriate conduct with a minor in the home. My hands began to tremble as they explained that someone had accused me of being a predator. They needed to interview Thomas separately and inspect our home immediately. Thomas must have sensed my distress because he started crying and wrapped his arms around my waist, pleading with them not to take him away. The next 3 hours were agonizing. They interviewed Thomas in his bedroom while I remained in the living room with another worker, reviewing our daily routines. They examined everything, from our sleeping arrangements to the photographs on the walls. Thomas continued to cry for me, and I could hear him through the door repeating, "I want my dad," over and over. Finally, they emerged and stated Thomas had been very clear that I was his father and that he felt secure and cherished. They found no evidence of any inappropriate behavior. The worker actually apologized and said it was evident this was a malicious false report. I knew precisely who had made that call. The next day, I applied for a restraining order against Lisa and began documenting everything. But little did I realize, I was already behind. Lisa had already begun disseminating rumors. The full story is linked below. The rumors spread through our neighborhood like wildfire. Within days, I noticed parents pulling their children away when Thomas and I walked past at the grocery store. People who had smiled at us for years now avoided eye contact. The cashier who always inquired about Thomas's baseball games suddenly became cold and efficient, scanning our items without a word. Thomas noticed too. He returned home from school one afternoon with red eyes and wouldn't disclose what had occurred. I later learned from his teacher that some children had started calling me names during recess. She had intervened, but the damage was done. Thomas had gotten into his first fight defending me. I sat him down that night and attempted to explain what was happening in terms a 10-year-old could grasp. He just hugged me tighter and said he didn't care what anyone said, but I could perceive the confusion in his eyes. His world was shifting, and there was nothing I could do to shield him from it. The following morning, I dropped Thomas off at school and observed a group of mothers huddled near the entrance. They kept glancing my way and whispering. One of them, Sarah, whose son played on Thomas's baseball team, broke away from the group and marched toward me. "We need to talk," she stated, crossing her arms. "Several of us have concerns about you coaching the team." My stomach dropped. I've been coaching Thomas's Little League team for 3 years. It was one of our favorite things to do together. "What concerns?" I inquired, though I already knew the answer. "Given the recent allegations, we believe it would be best if you stepped down for the children's safety." The word struck me like a blow. I wanted to scream that the allegations were false, that CPS had cleared me, that Lisa was manipulating everyone. Instead, I simply nodded and walked back to my car. My hands trembled as I gripped the steering wheel. Lisa was systematically dismantling our life, and she was succeeding. That afternoon, I received a call from the school principal. She wished to meet with me about some anonymous reports they had received. My heart sank. I knew precisely who was behind those reports. The meeting was scheduled for the next day. I spent the night reviewing all my documentation, printing emails, organizing the custody papers Lisa had signed. I barely slept, rehearsing what I would say, how I would defend myself against unseen accusations. The principal, Mrs. Chun, had always been supportive of our situation, but when I entered her office, her expression was guarded. She explained that multiple parents had voiced concerns about Thomas's well-being. Some claimed he seemed withdrawn. Others said they had seen bruises from his fights. One report even suggested Thomas had confided in a classmate that he was afraid to go home. "That's not true," I said, my voice cracking. "You can ask Thomas yourself. He's happy, he's loved. These reports, they're all coming from." "I can't discuss who made the reports," Mrs. Chun interrupted. "But given the volume of concerns, we need to take action. Thomas will need to meet with the school counselor twice a week, and," she paused, looking uncomfortable, "he's being suspended from extracurricular activities pending the counselor's assessment." "You're taking him off the baseball team?" I couldn't conceal the anger in my voice. "Do you know what that will do to him? Baseball is everything to him." "It's temporary," she assured me, but I could see she was merely following protocol. "Once the counselor clears him, he can return to all activities." I left the office feeling defeated. How was I supposed to tell Thomas he couldn't play baseball? How could I explain that the woman who gave birth to him was destroying the life we had built? That night, Thomas cried when I informed him about the suspension. He didn't understand why he was being punished when he hadn't done anything wrong. I held him while he sobbed, promising we would get through this together. But for the first time in 10 years, I wasn't sure I could keep that promise. The next few days were a blur of meetings and phone calls. I retained a family lawyer with money I didn't possess, maxing out my credit card. She reviewed all my documentation and assured me my custody was secure, but cautioned that Lisa could make our lives difficult if she had resources. "She's attempting to build a case for reunification," the lawyer explained, "creating doubt about your fitness as a parent, establishing herself in the community, showing maternal interest. It's calculated." Meanwhile, Lisa's social media campaign intensified. She posted old photographs from when she was pregnant, writing lengthy captions about the error she had made and how she had matured as a person. She shared articles about maternal bonds and second chances. Her posts garnered hundreds of sympathetic comments from strangers who were unaware of the true narrative. Then she escalated again. One evening, Thomas was doing homework at the kitchen table when his tablet chimed. He had received a message on the game he played with his friends, but when he opened it, his face paled. "Dad," he said, his voice small, "there's a strange message." I looked at the screen. The message was from a new account. "Hi Thomas, this is your real mom. I miss you so much. I have so many presents for you. Do you want to see pictures of your new room at my house?" My blood ran cold. I screenshotted everything and immediately contacted my lawyer. She advised documenting everything, but warned that without proof it was Lisa, there wasn't much we could do. The account had no identifying information. Over the next week, the messages persisted. They began innocently enough, discussing toys and trips to amusement parks, but they gradually became more manipulative. Your dad is keeping us apart. Don't you want to meet your stepdad? I have a big house with a pool. Thomas showed me every message, but I could see they were affecting him. He started asking questions about Lisa, about why she left, about whether she truly was his mother. I answered honestly, but age-appropriately, attempting not to poison him against her while also protecting him from her manipulation. The counseling sessions at school seemed to be progressing well. The counselor, Mr. Rodriguez, informed me Thomas was well-adjusted and clearly loved, but he also mentioned Thomas had been inquiring about his biological mother, showing confusion about the situation. I explained about the messages, but without concrete proof they originated from Lisa, the school couldn't take action. One afternoon, I was walking to pick up Thomas when I noticed Lisa's Mercedes parked across from the school. She was simply sitting there, observing the playground. I called the police, but she drove away before they arrived. The officer took my report, but explained that sitting in a public area wasn't illegal. That night, I installed security cameras around our apartment. I adjusted Thomas's tablet settings to block unknown messages. I felt as though I was preparing for a siege. The next day, our elderly neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, knocked on my door. She had always been friendly, bringing cookies for Thomas and conversing about her grandchildren, but her expression was different now. "I need to speak with you," she said, not waiting for an invitation before pushing past me. "That woman, Lisa, she came to see me. She told me things about you, about how you're keeping her son from her." My heart pounded. "Mrs. Patterson, you've known us for years. You know I thought I knew," she interrupted. "But a mother separated from her child? That's not right." She showed me legal documents saying she's his biological mother. She's offering to pay for him to go to private school, to give him opportunities you can't. She abandoned him, I stated firmly. She signed away her rights. She left a baby with 2 teenagers and disappeared for 10 years. Mrs. Patterson's expression softened slightly. She said she was young and scared. People make mistakes. And I was young too. I countered, but I stayed. I raised him. I'm his father. She left without another word, but I could see Lisa's venom was working. She was turning our community against us, person by person. That weekend, I decided we needed a respite. I took Thomas to our favorite hiking trail, hoping some time in nature would help us both clear our minds. He seemed lighter, away from the neighborhood, laughing as we skipped stones in the creek. On the drive home, he was quiet. Then suddenly he asked, "Dad, what if she takes me away?" I pulled over, unable to drive with the weight of his fear. I turned to face him, seeing my own terror reflected in his eyes. "Listen to me," I said, taking his hands. "No one is taking you anywhere. You're my son. We have legal papers that say so. More importantly, we have 10 years of memories, of love, of being a family. That's stronger than anything." He nodded, but I could see he wasn't entirely convinced. Neither was I. When we arrived home, there was a notice taped to our door. Lisa had filed a petition with the court to revisit the custody arrangement. My lawyer had warned me this was coming, but seeing it in official legal language made it real. She was claiming I had manipulated her when she was young and vulnerable, that she had been coerced into signing away her rights. I called my lawyer immediately. She reviewed the filing and said Lisa was throwing everything at the wall to see what would stick. The accusations were vague, but designed to force a hearing where she could make her case publicly. "The good news is her case is weak," the lawyer said. "The bad news is she can drag this out and make your life miserable in the meantime." That night, I sat at my computer after Thomas went to bed, writing down everything I could recall from the past 10 years. Every birthday, every milestone, every sleepless night when he was ill. I uploaded photographs, videos, report cards, medical records. I was building a case not just for custody, but for the truth of our relationship. The next morning, Thomas's counselor called. He was concerned about some things Thomas had said in their last session. Apparently, Thomas had mentioned being confused about why his real mom wanted him now when she hadn't before. He was struggling with feelings of loyalty to me versus curiosity about Lisa. "It's completely normal," Mr. Rodriguez assured me, "but I think it would be helpful if Thomas could process these feelings with a therapist outside of school, someone who specializes in complex family dynamics." I agreed, even though I knew therapy would be another expense I couldn't afford. But Thomas's well-being was worth any cost. As I hung up, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It was a photo of Thomas at school, taken from a distance. The caption read, "He looks just like me. Nature always wins over nurture." My hands trembled as I forwarded it to my lawyer. This was harassment, but proving it was Lisa would be another challenge. That afternoon, I arrived early to pick up Thomas, wanting to avoid any chance of encountering Lisa. But as I waited by the gate, I noticed other parents giving me a wider berth than usual. One father I had chatted with at baseball games actually moved his daughter to the other side of the yard when he saw me. When Thomas emerged, he was subdued. His teacher followed him, asking to speak with me privately. She explained that Thomas had been distracted in class and other students had been asking him about his two moms and dad. The situation was affecting his education. As we walked to the car, Thomas suddenly stopped. "Dad, I don't want to go to school anymore." My heart broke. School had always been his happy place. He loved learning, loved his friends. Lisa was poisoning that too. "We'll figure it out," I promised, though I had no idea how. That evening, as I was preparing dinner, there was a knock at the door. Through the peephole, I saw two people I didn't recognize. I opened the door cautiously. "Mr. Name, we're from Child Protective Services. We've received another report and need to conduct a follow-up investigation." My stomach churned as I stepped aside to let them in. The workers were different from last time, their faces stern and businesslike. Thomas heard their voices and came running from his room, immediately grabbing my hand when he saw the badges. "We need to conduct separate interviews again," the lead worker said, a woman with graying hair pulled back severely, "and we'll need to inspect the home more thoroughly this time." Thomas's grip tightened. I knelt down and told him everything would be okay, that these people just needed to ask some questions, but his eyes were wide with fear as they led him to his room. The other worker, a younger man with a clipboard, started asking me detailed questions about our daily routine, our finances, Thomas's medical history. Every answer I gave seemed to prompt 3 more questions. Through the walls, I could hear Thomas's voice, high and stressed, though I couldn't make out the words. 2 hours passed. The workers examined every corner of our apartment, taking photographs, making notes. They checked the refrigerator, looked through Thomas's schoolwork, even inspected our bathroom for signs of neglect. Finally, they emerged from Thomas's room. "Your son seems very anxious," the woman said. "He mentioned someone has been contacting him online claiming to be his mother. He also said, kids at school have been saying things about you." I explained about Lisa, showed them the restraining order paperwork, the screenshots of the messages. They took copies of everything, but their expressions remained neutral. "We'll need to file our report," the man stated. "Given that this is the second complaint in a short period, we may need to conduct follow-up visits." After they left, Thomas was quiet. He picked at his dinner, barely eating. When I tucked him in that night, he clung to me longer than usual. "They kept asking if I was happy," he whispered. "If you ever hurt me." I told them no, but they kept asking different ways. I smoothed his hair, fighting back my own tears. "You did great, buddy. You told the truth, and that's all that matters." The next morning, I kept Thomas home from school. He needed a break from the whispers and stares. We spent the day working on a model airplane, trying to pretend everything was normal, but I could see the worry in his eyes every time the phone rang. That afternoon, my lawyer called with bad news. The court had expedited Lisa's petition. The hearing was set for 3 weeks away. She explained that the multiple CPS reports, even though unsubstantiated, were working in Lisa's favor. "Judges take patterns seriously," she said. "Even if each individual report is cleared, the frequency suggests instability. You need character witnesses, people who can testify about your relationship with Thomas." I started making a list, but it was shorter than I had hoped. So many people in our community had been poisoned by Lisa's rumors. The parents from the baseball team wouldn't return my calls. Even some of my coworkers had started acting strange after Lisa had shown up at my workplace, crying about her stolen son. That evening, I was helping Thomas with his homework when my phone rang. It was Mrs. Chun from the school. "I'm sorry to call so late," she said, "but I wanted to give you a heads up. We received a formal complaint from a parent about your presence on school grounds. Until this is resolved, you'll need to arrange for someone else to pick up and drop off Thomas." "You're banning me from the school?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "It's not a ban," she said carefully. "It's a temporary safety measure. You can designate another adult or Thomas can take a bus." I hung up, feeling the walls closing in. How could I explain to Thomas that I couldn't even take him to school anymore? The next day, I arranged for Mrs. Patterson to walk Thomas to school. Despite our recent tension, she agreed reluctantly, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. Thomas was confused and hurt, asking why I couldn't come with him. While he was at school, I drove to Jane's parents' house. I hadn't spoken to them in years, but I was desperate. Maybe they could provide some insight into Lisa's behavior or even serve as character witnesses. Jane's mother, Catherine, answered the door. Her face went pale when she saw me. "We can't help you," she said immediately, starting to close the door. "Please," I begged. "This is about Thomas. Lisa is trying to take him." Catherine hesitated, then stepped outside, closing the door behind her. "Lisa has been very generous to us," she said quietly. After Jane left, After we failed to help with Thomas, Lisa started sending money, helping with our mortgage. The pieces clicked into place. She's been paying you to stay quiet. Catherine's eyes filled with tears. We needed the help. My husband's medical bills. But we never thought she'd come back for him. We thought she was just easing her guilt. You could tell the truth, I said. Tell the court how she abandoned him, how she's been planning this. We can't, Catherine whispered. She has emails, texts where we thanked her for the money, where we agreed to not interfere. If we speak against her, she'll say we sold our grandson. I left their house feeling more isolated than ever. Lisa had been planning this for years, building her case, while I had just been trying to survive day to day. When I picked up Thomas from Mrs. Patterson's that afternoon, he was upset. Kids at school had been asking why I wasn't allowed there anymore. One boy said his mom told him I was dangerous. That night, I found Thomas in his room packing his backpack. What are you doing, buddy? He looked up at me with tears in his eyes. Maybe if I go with her, everyone will stop being mean to you. I pulled him into my arms, my heart shattering. No, Thomas, no. We don't give up on family. We stick together no matter what. But even as I said it, I wondered how much more he could endure. The harassment intensified over the next few days. Our tires were slashed overnight. Someone spray-painted Predator on our apartment door. The security cameras I had installed captured figures in hoodies, but their faces were obscured. I filed police reports, but without clear identification, there was nothing they could do. The apartment manager gave me a warning about the vandalism, saying other tenants were complaining. Then came the call that altered everything. It was from Thomas's therapist, Dr. Catherine Reeves, whom we had seen twice. I'm concerned about something Thomas said in our session today, she said. He mentioned that someone named Lisa has been promising him a better life. He seems very conflicted. She's been manipulating him, I explained. She's his biological mother who abandoned him. I understand, Dr. Reeves said, but Thomas also expressed some concerning thoughts. He said he sometimes wonders if everyone would be happier if he wasn't around. My blood ran cold. He said that? Not in those exact words, but the sentiment was clear. I think the stress of this situation is taking a serious toll on him. Have you thought about what might be best for Thomas in the long term? Living with me is what's best for him, I said firmly. Of course, she said, but I could hear the doubt in her voice. Another professional Lisa had influenced. That night, I sat outside Thomas's room, listening to him breathe as he slept. How had it come to this? How had Lisa managed to turn our entire world against us in just a few weeks? The next morning, Thomas didn't want to get out of bed. He complained of a stomach ache, but I knew it was more than that. I let him stay home again, calling in sick to my own job. My boss was losing patience with my absences, but I couldn't leave Thomas alone. We were eating lunch when there was a knock at the door. Through the peephole, I saw a man in a suit holding a briefcase. Process server, he announced when I opened the door. You're being served with a civil suit. I took the papers with trembling hands. Lisa was suing me for emotional damages, claiming I had alienated her from her son and caused her years of pain and suffering. The amount she was seeking would bankrupt me. Thomas watched from the hallway. What is it, Dad? Just paperwork, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Nothing to worry about. But he knew I was lying. He always knew. That afternoon, while Thomas played video games, I called my lawyer. She reviewed the civil suit and sighed heavily. This is a tactic, she said. She's trying to drain your resources before the custody hearing. You'll need to respond, which means more legal fees. I don't have more money, I admitted. There might be legal aid options, she said. But honestly, Lisa seems to have unlimited resources. She's playing a long game. After I hung up, I found Thomas standing in the doorway. Are we going to lose our home? He asked quietly. I wanted to lie to protect him, but he deserved honesty. I don't know, buddy, but whatever happens, we'll face it together. That evening, I was making dinner when Thomas's tablet chimed. He had been so good about showing me messages, but this time he hesitated. What is it? I asked. He handed me the tablet reluctantly. The message was from a different account. Your dad is going to lose. He doesn't have the money to fight me. But you don't have to suffer. Come live with me, and I'll make all this stop. I'll make sure he doesn't get in trouble. I screenshotted it immediately, but I could see the damage was done. Thomas looked torn, confused by the manipulation. She's lying, I told him. This isn't your fault, and you're not responsible for fixing it. But I could see him withdrawing, carrying a burden no 10-year-old should have to bear. The next few days blurred together. More CPS visits, more police reports for vandalism, more messages to Thomas that grew increasingly manipulative. Lisa was everywhere and nowhere, orchestrating our destruction from the shadows. Then, on a Thursday afternoon, everything erupted. I had sent Thomas to school with Mrs. Patterson, planning to use the day to meet with legal aid lawyers. But 2 hours later, I received a frantic call from the school. Thomas is missing, Mrs. Chen said, her voice shaking. He was in class, went to the bathroom, and never came back. We've searched the entire building. My world tilted. I raced to the school, my heart pounding. Police were already there, questioning teachers and searching the grounds. When did you last see him? An officer asked. This morning, I said, my voice cracking. He was fine. Then my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. He's safe. He came to me. Don't worry. I'm taking good care of my son. I showed the police immediately. They traced the number, but it led to a burner phone. An Amber Alert was issued. Lisa's photo was distributed, but she had planned well. The next 8 hours were the longest of my life. I sat in the police station, answering questions, providing photos, praying for any news. The detectives were kind but honest. If Lisa had taken him out of state, it would be harder to track them. Then, around 10 p.m., Thomas called my phone. Dad. His voice was small, scared. Thomas, where are you? Are you okay? I'm at a hotel, he said. She said we were just going for ice cream, but then she kept driving. Dad, I want to come home. I'm coming to get you, I said. Can you tell me what you see? But then I heard Lisa's voice in the background, and the line went dead. The police traced the call to a hotel 2 hours away. By the time they arrived, Lisa and Thomas were gone. But the hotel had security footage, clear evidence of Lisa taking Thomas without permission. This changes everything, my lawyer said when I called her. Kidnapping, crossing state lines, she's destroyed any chance at custody. But I didn't care about legal victories. I just wanted Thomas home. The next morning, Lisa called from another burner phone. I'm bringing him back, she said, sounding exhausted. He won't stop crying for you. This isn't how I thought it would be. Where? I asked. The school. 1 hour. Come alone. I immediately called the police, but they advised against going alone. We compromised. They would stay out of sight unless needed. I arrived at the school to find Lisa's Mercedes in the parking lot. Thomas was in the back seat, and when he saw me, he started sobbing. Lisa got out, looking haggard, nothing like the polished woman who had started this conflict. He doesn't even know me, she said, tears streaming down her face. He spent the whole time talking about you, showing me pictures on his tablet of your life together. Every story was about you. Thomas scrambled out of the car and ran to me. I held him tight, feeling his small body shake with sobs. I'm sorry, he kept saying. She said if I went with her, she'd stop hurting you. She said she'd make everyone be nice to you again. It's not your fault, I told him. None of this is your fault. Lisa stood there watching us, something breaking in her expression. I thought he'd love me once he got to know me. I thought nature would win. The police moved in then, placing her under arrest. She didn't resist, just kept staring at Thomas clinging to me. I'm his mother, she said quietly as they cuffed her. No, Thomas said, his voice stronger than I had heard in weeks. You're not. You're just someone who left. He's my dad. As the police car drove away with Lisa, I held Thomas in the school parking lot, both of us crying with relief. We had endured, but the emotional wounds would take time to mend. The following days were a whirlwind of police interviews, court appearances, and therapy sessions. Lisa was charged with custodial interference and kidnapping. Her husband, apparently unaware of her actions, filed for divorce and offered to testify about her obsessive behavior. Slowly, the truth disseminated through our community. The parents who had avoided us began reaching out with apologies. Mrs. Patterson brought over a casserole and wept on our doorstep. The school lifted all restrictions, and Mrs. Chin personally apologized. But the damage was real. Thomas had nightmares, afraid Lisa would return. He became clingy, anxious when I was out of sight. We increased his therapy sessions, working through the trauma together. A week later, we had an unexpected visitor. Jane stood at our door, looking older, tired, but familiar. I heard what happened, she said. My parents called. I came as soon as I could. Thomas hid behind me, uncertain about this new development. I'm not here to disrupt your life, Jane said quickly. I know I gave up any right to that, but I thought maybe I could help. Testify about Lisa, about how she manipulated everyone. I was wary, but Thomas surprised me by stepping forward slightly. Are you going to leave again? He asked bluntly. Jane's eyes filled with tears. I'm not asking to be part of your life. I know I don't deserve that, but I want to help make this right, to help stop Lisa from hurting you anymore. Over the next weeks, Jane remained in town, true to her word. She testified in court about Lisa's manipulation, her abandonment, her pattern of using people. She didn't ask for anything from Thomas, didn't try to insert herself into our lives. She just helped. The custody hearing transformed into a criminal trial instead, with the kidnapping charges and mounting evidence of harassment. Lisa's case collapsed. She was sentenced to probation and mandatory psychiatric treatment. A permanent restraining order was put in place. Jane prepared to depart after the trial, but Thomas stopped her. Maybe, he said quietly, Maybe you could visit sometimes. If you promise not to leave without saying goodbye. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning. The weeks after the trial were more challenging than I had anticipated. Thomas flinched at every knock on the door, convinced Lisa would somehow appear despite the restraining order. I caught him checking the locks on windows before bed, something he had never done before. The school counselor increased their sessions to 3 times a week. One afternoon, I arrived at Mrs. Patterson's to pick up Thomas and found him sitting on her porch steps, backpack beside him. His eyes were red-rimmed. Mrs. Patterson emerged, looking concerned. She explained that Thomas had refused to go inside after school, insisting on waiting outside where he could observe the street. He had been watching every car that passed, flinching whenever a Mercedes drove by. That night, Thomas asked if we could relocate somewhere far away, where nobody knew about Lisa or what had happened. I understood the impulse, but our entire life was here. My jobs, his school, the few friends who had stood by us. The next morning brought another challenge. My boss called me into his office. He had been patient during the crisis, but my absences had become an issue. He required reliability, and with Thomas's ongoing needs, I couldn't guarantee that. He gave me 2 weeks to devise a solution or find another job. I spent that evening scrolling through job listings while Thomas did homework. Everything either paid less or required hours I couldn't work. Single parenting had always been a balancing act, but now it felt impossible. Thomas must have sensed my stress because he suddenly closed his textbook and came to sit beside me on the couch. He didn't say anything, just leaned against my shoulder. We sat like that for a while, both of us trying to pretend things were normal. The following week, Jane called. She had been staying at a motel across town since the trial, keeping her promise not to intrude, but she had a proposition. She explained that she had been working remotely for a tech company and had accumulated a decent amount of savings. She wanted to help with Thomas's therapy costs. Not as his mother, she emphasized, but as someone who owed us both a debt she could never fully repay. I was torn. We desperately needed the help, but accepting money from Jane felt like opening a door I wasn't sure we were ready for. I told her I would consider it. That night, I mentioned Jane's offer to Thomas. His reaction surprised me. He said if she wanted to help pay for his therapy, that was acceptable, but he didn't want to see her yet. Maybe someday, but not now. I called Jane back and accepted her offer with clear boundaries. She could assist with the therapy bills, but there would be no visits, no attempts at building a relationship unless Thomas initiated it. She agreed immediately. The therapy sessions were gradually helping. Dr. Reeves worked with Thomas on processing his confusion about Lisa, his guilt over going with her, his fear that she would return. Some days were better than others. One session, Thomas drew a picture of our family. It was just the 2 of us standing in front of our apartment, but he had drawn a thick black border around us, like a fortress. When Dr. Reeves inquired about it, Thomas said it was to keep the bad people out. Meanwhile, I was struggling to find a new job that would accommodate our schedule. Most employers weren't interested in someone who might need to leave suddenly for school emergencies or therapy appointments. My savings were dwindling rapidly. Then Mrs. Patterson's daughter, who owned a small online business, offered me a part-time position packing orders. The hours were flexible, and I could work from home when needed. The pay wasn't great, but it was something. I started the next week, grateful for the lifeline. Thomas would do his homework at the kitchen table while I packed orders in the living room. It wasn't ideal, but we were together, and that's what mattered. The community's attitude had shifted dramatically after Lisa's arrest made the local news. Parents who had avoided us now made efforts to include Thomas in playdates and birthday parties. But Thomas wasn't ready. He had become withdrawn, preferring to stay home rather than risk uncomfortable questions from other children. His teacher called one afternoon, concerned about his isolation. Thomas was performing well academically, but wouldn't participate in group activities. He ate lunch alone, spent recess in the library. She suggested perhaps getting him involved in something outside school, something fresh where nobody knew our story. I found a youth art program at the community center 2 towns over. Thomas was hesitant at first, but the instructor was warm and understanding. She didn't pry when Thomas was quiet, just gave him space to create. Slowly, he began to open up. He made a friend, a quiet child named Marcus, who was dealing with his own family difficulties. They bonded over their shared love of drawing and their mutual understanding that sometimes families were complicated. One evening, Thomas came home from art class with the first genuine smile I had seen in months. He had won a small award for one of his paintings. It wasn't much, just a certificate and a ribbon, but he was proud. We framed it and hung it in his room. The financial pressure was still intense. Even with Jane's help covering therapy and my new job, we were barely making ends meet. I sold my car, relying on public transportation and Mrs. Patterson's kindness for Thomas's school runs. Then came an unexpected development. Lisa's ex-husband reached out through my lawyer. He felt terrible about what had transpired and wished to make amends. He couldn't undo Lisa's actions, but he could offer something tangible. He owned several rental properties and had a small 2-bedroom house sitting vacant. He offered it to us at half the market rate. I was suspicious at first. Why would he help us? But my lawyer assured me it was legitimate. The man genuinely felt remorseful about unknowingly enabling Lisa's obsession. He had discovered she had been planning her return for years, keeping detailed files about us, hiring private investigators. He wanted to do something positive. Thomas was anxious about moving, even just across town, but when we visited the house, something shifted. It had a small backyard, something we had never possessed. Thomas immediately started talking about maybe getting a dog someday. We moved on a Saturday. Mrs. Patterson helped, along with a few parents from Thomas's art class who had heard our story. It was strange accepting assistance from people who had once avoided us, but I was learning that pride was a luxury I couldn't afford. That first night in the new house, Thomas had a panic attack. He was convinced Lisa would find us, that she had somehow obtained our new address. I sat with him on his bedroom floor, reminding him about the restraining order, the monitoring anklet she had to wear, all the protections in place. Eventually, he calmed down enough to sleep. I stayed in his doorway for hours, watching him breathe, ready to reassure him if he awoke. The next few weeks were about establishing new routines. Thomas started taking the bus to school, which gave him a sense of independence. I worked during school hours, then picked him up from art class in the evenings. Slowly, very slowly, we found a rhythm. One afternoon, Thomas asked if we could acquire a security system for the house, not because he thought Lisa would come, he said, but because it would help him sleep better. We installed basic door alarms and a camera for the front entrance. It wasn't much, but Thomas visibly relaxed afterward. His therapy sessions were showing progress. Dr. Reeves said Thomas was processing his trauma well, learning to differentiate his fear from reality. He still had difficult days, but they were becoming less frequent. Then Jane called again. She had been seeing her own therapist, working through her guilt and failures. She wasn't asking to see Thomas, she emphasized. She just wanted me to know she was getting help, trying to understand why she had fled all those years ago. I didn't know what to say. Part of me was still angry at her for leaving, for making me do this alone, but another part understood that she had been just a scared kid too. I told her I was glad she was getting help and hung up. Thomas must have overheard because he asked about it at dinner. I explained honestly that Jane was in therapy, working on herself. He nodded thoughtfully, but didn't say anything more. A month into the new house, Thomas made another friend at art class, a girl named Sophia who loved painting landscapes. They started working on a project together, and Thomas actually asked if she could come over to work on it at our house. It was a minor detail, but monumental for us. Thomas was allowing someone into our space, trusting again. Sophia's mom dropped her off, and I could see her observing our modest home, clearly having heard some version of our story, but she was kind, saying she was glad Thomas had found such a good friend in her daughter. The children worked on their project in the backyard while I prepared snacks. I heard Thomas genuinely laughing, explaining some technique he had learned. It was the most normal he had sounded in months. That weekend, we went to the animal shelter. Thomas had been researching dogs obsessively, reading about different breeds and their temperaments. He was drawn to a medium-sized mutt with anxious eyes who cowered in the back of his kennel. The shelter worker explained the dog had been through multiple homes, each return making him more timid. Thomas sat on the floor of the visiting room, allowing the dog to approach at his own pace. When the dog finally crept forward to sniff his hand, Thomas looked up at me with tears in his eyes. We brought the dog home that day. Thomas named him Buddy, and they were inseparable from the start. Buddy slept on Thomas's bed, followed him around the house, and seemed to sense when Thomas was anxious, pressing close against his leg. The first time Thomas had a nightmare in the new house, Buddy was there before I was, licking his face and whimpering until Thomas woke up. After that, the nightmares became less frequent. Work was improving. Mrs. Patterson's daughter was impressed with my organization and offered me more hours. It still wasn't much, but combined with careful budgeting, we were stable. Thomas didn't have everything other children had, but he had what he needed. One evening, while walking Buddy, we encountered one of Thomas's old baseball teammates. The boy excitedly told Thomas about the team's recent games, how they missed him at practice. Thomas listened politely, but didn't engage much. After the boy left, Thomas said, maybe next year he'd think about playing again. Maybe. The seasons changed. Thomas's art improved dramatically. His teacher suggested entering him in a regional youth art competition. Thomas was hesitant, worried about the attention it might bring, but eventually agreed. The day of the competition, I watched him set up his pieces with steady hands. He had matured in these months, becoming more confident in environments where our story was unknown. When they announced he had won third place in his age group, his smile was radiant. Jane sent a card congratulating him. Thomas stared at it for a long time before placing it in his desk drawer, not discarded, but not displayed either. Progress in its own way. As winter approached, we settled into our new routine. Thomas went to school, art class, therapy. I worked, managed the house, walked Buddy. It wasn't the life I had envisioned at 18, but it was ours. One night, as I tucked Thomas in, he said something that startled me. He said he was glad Lisa had tried to take him, not because of what happened, but because it showed him what truly mattered. He knew now that I would fight for him, that our family was real, even if it didn't resemble others. I didn't trust myself to speak, just hugged him tighter. Buddy wedged himself between us, tail wagging, completing our small unit. The court date for Lisa's probation review was approaching. My lawyer said she had been complying with all requirements, attending mandatory therapy, staying away from us. There was talk of her moving out of state when her probation ended, starting fresh somewhere else. Thomas said he didn't care where she went, as long as she stayed away. But I could see him tense whenever the mail arrived, still worried about unexpected contact. Then came a surprise. My old boss called. They had experienced difficulty filling my position and wondered if I would consider returning part-time with flexible hours. The pay was better than what I was earning, and they understood my situation now. I discussed it with Thomas. He was concerned about changes to our routine, but understood we needed the money. We agreed I would try it for a month and see how it went. The first day back was strange. Some coworkers were overly friendly, clearly feeling guilty about their earlier judgment. Others maintained a professional distance. But the work was familiar, and the steady paycheck would help enormously. Thomas started spending afternoons at Mrs. Patterson's again when needed. She had become like a grandmother to him, and Buddy was always welcome. Sometimes I would find them all in her living room, Thomas doing homework while Mrs. Patterson knitted and Buddy dozed at their feet. One afternoon, Thomas came home from therapy with a request. He wanted to write a letter to Jane, not to reconnect, but to express some things he needed to say. Dr. Reeves thought it might help with closure. He worked on that letter for days, writing and rewriting. I didn't read it, respecting his privacy. When he finally sealed the envelope, he asked me to mail it. Jane messaged me a week later, simply stating she had received it and would honor whatever Thomas needed. Spring arrived with tentative hope. Thomas rejoined one after-school activity, a science club that met weekly. He was cautious about making friends, but slowly opened up to a few children who shared his interests. The art program announced their annual showcase. Parents and community members would view the students' work. Thomas was nervous about the exposure, but excited to display his progress. The night of the showcase, I watched Thomas explain his paintings to visitors. He stood taller now, spoke clearer. When someone inquired about the recurring theme of boundaries in his work, he simply said art helped him process things. No details, no oversharing, just quiet confidence. As we drove home, Thomas said he had been contemplating high school. It was still a couple of years away, but he wanted to attend the arts magnet program across town. It would mean longer commutes, but he was ready to invest in his future. That night, I found myself planning beyond next week for the first time in months. Thomas was healing. We were stable. The future, while uncertain, no longer felt like something to merely survive, but something to actively construct. Lisa's probation concluded without incident. She moved to another state, according to my lawyer. No forwarding address, no attempts at contact. Just gone. Finally, Thomas received the news with relief, but also something else, closure. Maybe. He said he hoped she found help, that she found whatever she was seeking. But he was done wondering about her. Summer meant more art classes, day camps when I could afford them, long walks with Buddy. Thomas made friends with children in the neighborhood, cautiously but genuinely. Our house became an occasional gathering spot, children working on art projects in the backyard while I worked inside. One evening, as I watched Thomas teaching Buddy a new trick while his friends cheered them on, I realized we had succeeded. Not to some flawless ending, but to a place of stability and optimism. We had survived the worst and built something new from the fragments. Thomas caught me watching and grinned, the carefree expression of a child who knew he was loved and secure. That was enough. More than enough. We still had therapy appointments, bills to pay, difficult days when the past felt too close. But we had each other, and Buddy, and a community we had slowly rebuilt. Thomas was flourishing in his own quiet way, and I was learning to forgive myself for not being perfect, just present. As summer transitioned to autumn, Thomas started 7th grade with cautious optimism. He joined the art club immediately and even considered trying out for the school play's set design team. Small steps, but forward ones. I kept Jane updated through occasional messages, just basics about Thomas's progress. She always responded with gratitude and respect for our boundaries. Maybe someday Thomas would desire more, but that was his decision to make when ready. Our life wasn't what anyone would have planned, but watching Thomas head off to school that morning, backpack bouncing, turning to wave at me and Buddy in the doorway, I knew we had found our path, different from others, marked by challenges, but uniquely ours.